Coming up live on YouTube with the draft on Thursday night. We break down where the Brooklyn Nets and Sean Marks stand on trying to trade Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neal, all of the trade chaos around the NBA at large and how it impacts the Nets, and ultimately, have Doug Norrie and myself found the prospects for Brooklyn in the first round? We dive in next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, my friends. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. He's the owner-operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports rankings. I'm Adam Armbrecht, covering the New York Football Giants on the One Giant Podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms, and tell you that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code all caps Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. And Doug, from the man who didn't forget to take off his lanyard, we're talking draft. We're talking Brooklyn Nets, Sean Marks. There's a lot that is unfolding here as we get down to the official draft day. And it's kind of what we anticipated, all this ramping up before 8 o'clock Thursday night.
Yeah, 24 hour less at this point, less than 24 hours before the NBA draft starts. It's been a really pretty cool week in terms of just news already. It does feel like there's going to be more stuff that fires here over the next 24 hours. Already got a pretty big trade in the books, although it hasn't been completed with Kristaps Porzingis. We'll talk about that later. So a lot of stuff going on here. Word in Nets world about where they could be moving and shaking over the next 24 hours as well. There's just a lot of moving pieces, and this is just a really, really cool time of year to be following the NBA. In some ways, it's as fun to follow this stuff as it is to follow the games, right? This is the NBA becomes sort of a 12-month-a-year landscape, and this is one of the reasons. So a lot of ground shift stuff that could happen here over the next 24 hours, and definitely some Nets-specific stuff that we're going to get into pretty shortly here.
And on the back end, obviously, we'll talk about attending NBA Media Day, having a great opportunity to talk a lot of these young prospects. It was a lot of fun. So we'll tap into that on the back end of this episode, but Nets-centric, as we intend to be on this podcast. Sean Marks, the reports that came out throughout the day today, as everyone's trying to wheel and deal, is that the Nets are driving a hard bargain around what they want back in return for Dorian Finney-Smith or Royce O'Neal in potential trades. I'm not surprised by it. I am a little bit potentially concerned because we know where the Nets are financially and this desire to shed some level of money here. You're not just throwing Joe Harris, and his $20 million contract out the window. Are you worried at all that push comes to shove and other deals get made before the Nets can find the right trade partner? Because we know both these guys in Finney-Smith and O'Neal do have incredible value around the league. And maybe Sean Marks is just trying to watch where these other pieces unfold.
Yeah, so Jonathan Givony was on the Zach Lowe podcast today. They were getting into the nitty-gritty of some of the different stuff happening with teams. Lowe reported that the Nets were I think the words he was asking a lot, or maybe said pie in the sky when he came. I can't remember. The implication was that they were driving the price was pretty high. I'm going to assume one or maybe multiple first round picks for either Royce O'Neal or Dorian Finney-Smith. Look, you can ask for whatever you want to ask for. But the market value is what someone will give you. So it's it doesn't necessarily mean that's what they're worth. If that's just what you're asking, but it does sound like at least what's happening now is Marks and company are trying to move off at least one of those guys with the understanding that there are teams out there that could use some veteran wing help that are more in championship mode. That would just, those guys would be more valuable to some other teams out there. Lakers, I don't know if the Warriors are in on this. Like there's a couple, the Cavaliers definitely need some 3/4 wing help for guys that can shoot. So it does sound like Marks and company are keeping the price high, whether that's where they end up landing or trading them at all. Look, they went down to the trade deadline last year with offers on the table for these guys and opted not to, or at least for Dorian Finney-Smith, and opted not to do it. So I'm just not sure exactly where they land here, but it does sound like they are aggressively trying to unload at least one of these guys before the draft. And my guess is in the end it happens. And I'm just not sure exactly what the price is going to be.
Yeah, I wonder how much is attached to these 21st and 22nd picks, which we'll talk about more specifically at the back end here, but just around, because when you talk about driving a hard bargain, well, there's the straight up trades. Like you said, we want, whatever, Atlanta's at 15 or Dallas is at 10. Dallas is at 10, and they want to get back Dorian Finney-Smith. And Sean Marks says, great, for the 10th pick. And Dallas is like, whoa,
No.
let's get a little real here. That's not going to happen. And Sean's like, well, they're like, okay, 21 back. He goes, well, no, I'm not giving up I'm not giving up the picks. I got guys that I want to draft in that point. And that could, I wonder if that's the starting point, pie in the sky as it's referred to, or is it that the Nets are trying to see, is there a team 16, 17, 18 that maybe that 1-to-1 trade makes sense, or maybe a second round pick can get thrown in. I don't think there's anything wrong with Sean Marks approaching it as like, I can take this as long as I need to, because while we've established when you're not a championship level team, you don't want to be in luxury tax, you don't want to be over the aprons. Yeah, that's understood. But in spite of what some, Nets fans have often said about Joe Tsai, he's not cheap for the sake of, not wanting to spend money. I would assume there's an instruction here around, yeah, we want to get underneath it, but we have more than one way to do that. Buy out Joe Harris, right? You know what I mean? Like, there's ways you can do this and keep the guys are clearly valuable and wait for the deadline to see how it unfolds, as opposed to feeling pressured that you need to dump these guys for what is clearly diminished value.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I do think the flip side to that is that this is also a wing heavy draft that the Nets ended up sticking in the 21-22 range. They think they might be able to get like 70% of what those guys offer. Mm-hmm. Maybe not in totality because of like the 1-for-1 skills, but like 70% of what those guys bring just in the draft on rookie scale contracts, and call it a day. You know what I mean? For a team that's not winning the championship anyway. And I think from a prudency standpoint, like that would be the move. And I know what you're saying. Like, you don't want to come off cheap for the sake of being cheap. But if you're not going to win, I mean, they did spend. Like they worked on spending when they had a championship window. They just have guys that might not fit that now. There's almost no chance you're going to be able to recoup more value than right now, would be my guess. So you probably just have to do it. I know what you're saying, but I think they should have done this at last trade deadline, but they whiffed, right? So, but that ship has sailed.
And it's interestingly enough, it's like you can easily go back and say, just let Yuta Watanabe play and trade Dorian Finney-Smith for 2 first-round picks and whatever. The results are the results. Not telling you he's the better player, just saying he's a player that you can play, right? The other thing I'll say to close out on this particular topic, and hopefully we hear more as we go into tomorrow. I prefer, by the way, that something unfolds before we get all the way to the draft so we can have a sense of where the Nets could be. We talked about next year's draft class being a little bit weaker. I wonder if that could end up being where Sean Marks makes the concession. We'd like to move up in this year's draft. We'd like to get where there's a lot of talented prospects. But you know what? If we can get the right team and go ahead and get first-round picks in next year's draft, maybe 2 of them, and have an opportunity to, again, target a specific player and get as high as possible, maybe that ends up being the value point of, I wanted first round this year, but I'll take them where we're void and continue to try to work with those assets. Because I think I agree with you too. You can keep veteran players in front of the rookies you bring in this draft class at 21 and 22, but at some point you're going to want to get the veterans out of the way. And I just wonder how the Nets try to work with that timeline. Coming up here in a second, we'll talk about the trades that have gone on around the league here, how it impacts Sean Marks and the Brooklyn Nets strategy, and additional rumors that are building as we lead towards draft.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Bird Dogs. Look, Bird Dogs just make you look good. Bird Dogs are stretch khaki short. They're designed to fit slimmer through the thigh, give you a really sculpted look. We got the Bird Dogs in the mail a couple weeks ago. I could probably count the hours on one hand. Let's make it 2 hands, but they've been here a long time that I have not had the Bird Dogs on. They're so flexible, really, really versatile. You can out there if you're really being really active, if you're just laying around the house. They're so comfortable. They got the wick away sweat stuff too, so you're not going to feel embarrassed if you've been going, hard in the pickleball court like this guy's been lately. They just invented the cloud knit fabric. It looks just like khaki, but stretches, gives you a slimmer fit. Don't have to sacrifice the movement. If you go, they're also going to throw in a free Yeti tumbler right now. I got the Yeti tumbler going in front of me right now. Adam always gives me a hard time because I don't know how to hold things in front of the camera. There we go. We both did it. Go grab that free Yeti tumbler with an order of Bird Dogs right now. You go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. You grab that tumbler with the order. You go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA for the free Yeti style tumbler, grab yourself a couple pairs of shorts. Look, I can't give a more rousing endorsement than I just do not take these things off. Bird dogs is the way to go. You will feel the same way. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you.
All right. So as we turn our attention, tying it into where are the Nets trying to go? Can they move these veterans? Where are they going in the draft? Things have, well, almost unfolded, right? They're still trying to work out the details on some deals that seem like they're all but occurring. We heard about the Denver Nuggets now. They're going to get maybe back into the first round with a deal with the Pacers because the Pacers have so many picks that they don't know what to do with. And we've also caught the rumor that the Atlanta Hawks, it's been long speculated that whether it's DeJounte Murray, whether it's John Collins, they want to move one of these guys. And now they're talking about 15 in one of them to try to get up. We talked about that threshold, right? Above 10, where there's a clear breaking point around the talent levels. Does like, I'm going to say it. Like, this all just bothers me because I want the Nets to be doing stuff. Like, why aren't the Nets being talked about with this stuff, right? It's not like Nets aren't packaging and doing things. They're waiting, and we've been preaching patience this whole time. But now it's too late. Now it's too late for patience. I need panic.
Look, I think there's sometimes with this stuff, there's only 30 teams. There's only so many deals that can be made, right? You only have so many players and so many picks. So it's not crazy to me that they're not in anything now. Just getting trades done in general is not easy. This is why there's way more rumors than actually trades that actually end up manifesting. So I'm not totally shocked that there has been not crazy movement here. There's also these things tend to just nothing, and then everything's a sprint also, right? Like, so just because it behooves you often to wait till the last minute to see if more value materializes. Like it for a lot of situations, it doesn't make sense to take the first offer or even the second because you just don't know. There are only 30 teams, but there's also tons of moving parts. So I'm not totally shocked about that. Go ahead. And then I can clarify that, but go ahead.
No. I agree. I know what you mean because you one domino has to fall before the next one does, and that ends up just being a hierarchy starts to get created based on what teams are trying to accomplish. When we broaden it out and talk about Kristaps Porzingis and now the Boston Celtics, like it is funny to me that there was this moment where it was Portland Trailblazers possibly trying to pursue Paul George. And it was like, all right, so the Clippers are going to maybe blow something up here a little bit. Hold on, flip it. Now the Clippers are going to gain Brogdon in this other trade. Like, from that standpoint, I commend the Brooklyn Nets if you care about this kind of stuff of like, don't start floating narratives where players on your team are like, am I all done here? We're talking about Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neal, but this is why Mikal Bridges, who we've long stood on, wasn't going anywhere. He never had to have any sense that he was going anywhere because the organization never even allowed that to enter the conversation. Even if you think it's going to be successful, Paul George turns around and goes, I guess this thing we're doing here maybe isn't. Oh no, it's back on. We're all good. That is such an interesting narrative about these late stages before the draft to me.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see more of this. I don't think there's going to end up being like crazy movement around the superstar stuff. That seems like that's not really going to materialize. I mean, we start with Dame Lillard. That's been obviously the name that's been talked about significantly when it comes with the Nets. The more and more reporting that comes out, that just sounds like the Blazers are going to take Scoot here, or excuse me, the Blazers are going to be there at 3. And actually, no, sorry. The Blazers are going to be there at 3, and it's going to be Scoot. And that's just going to be kind of the way it ends up going. And Lillard probably isn't going to ask out before that. Now, what happens later in the summer? Who knows, right? Like this, think about when Kevin Durant asked for a trade. That thing went on way into the summer before ultimately just started stopping before the season started. So I don't think a Lillard trade would have to happen now. It does not look like that's going to be the case leading into this draft. I don't think for a player of his magnitude, it just doesn't sound like there's been enough movement at this point, right? Like with less than 24 hours to go, the clock is sort of ticking on a huge deal like that. We've heard rumors around Zion too, maybe moved, but that seems like it's slowed down. So I think around like the superstar, you mentioned PG, the superstar stuff, I don't really see that really materializing in the next 24 hours. Those are the ones that are fun to think about. Obviously Lillard to the Nets is something that Nets fans have been arguing about here for, a month now, more, right? About whether or not it's going to happen, whether that's the right move. And it's been kind of a fascinating debate. But I think just because sometimes we want things to happen doesn't mean they're going to happen. Because there's just so much that has to, do you feel the same way about Lillard at this point though? I mean, like that's been the guy that we've talked about a ton, but now that we're really pushing into it, it's something else that Lowe and Gavoni mentioned also was that it actually parroted a lot of what we said on the podcast yesterday was that, they might want Bridges, but the Nets have no interest in doing that at all. So they're not going to move on and send Bridges the other way. Right. And so if that's not going to happen, they're probably between a rock and a hard place in terms of what they think value is. But I mean, we're in agreement here just in the NBA landscape around news that the Lillard thing is just not going to happen, if at least before the draft.
Yeah. And that I think it's like a good caveat to put in there, because while we look at it and say, he's not going to get traded, and they're going to take Scoot Henderson. And we know maybe how Dame Lillard has expressed around that and wanting to get experienced guys around him. Things can unfold after the draft, depending on how things go for other teams. They may say, we didn't quite get the guy we wanted, or we got a guy that Portland looks at and says that fits really well for us, or a player that makes it easier to move a veteran maybe to Portland, or vice versa, right? So I think things can still open up, but when we've talked about it, and I think you said it, it's like Damian Lillard never formally submitted, I want the trade. It was always pushing the organization to do something to make Portland better, not to make another team better with him on it, to make Portland and the Trailblazers better so that he could finish his career there. And I hinted this a little bit around drafting Scoot Henderson, where you go, maybe you draft him and you just try to let Lillard get some interaction with him and go, okay, this kid can do it. We can do something here, and you can make other moves, and that can turn a guy that doesn't want to go anywhere. It can help to turn him back around in a positive direction, because that's all he's looking for. Just convince me that this isn't going to be the same old thing. And remember, this past season for Damian Lillard, it's the first time. They haven't always been competitive. Haven't always had deep playoff runs. They were shutting dudes down at the back end of the season. And I think that's probably the frustration for Damian Lillard, even if a trade isn't necessarily going to come. Just on the Porzingis piece, are you surprised by that in general? Just as a general, he was going to opt out, going to go somewhere else. Then you get the opt-in. It's going to be Boston. Does that feel like a calculated move, or does that feel like a team that saw something, that saw some fractures in their ability to be a deep NBA Eastern Conference playoff team in the Boston Celtics?
It's an awesome trade for Boston. Stats was awesome last year. That's really
there's a wide range on that though. It's like he was awesome last year. Like that's what everyone's saying. Nick Angstad, Locked On Mass, had a great line about this on Twitter. He's like, so let me get this right. Bradley Beal, great player. Porzingis coming off a great season. He named somebody else on the Wizards coming off a great season.
Kuzma. Yeah.
Kuzma. But the Wizards stunk and they couldn't make the playoffs. Like it was this weird thing of being like a lot of great stats, like a lot of great guys, but you couldn't even make the playoffs collectively. Now it's different when you go somewhere else, but it was an interesting way to kind of look at that.
Yeah, I actually that's a hard thing to poke a hole in, but I think from like what Boston wants to do and sort of like what they need for a guy that can play 4 or 5, like can play drop coverage, and they can probably make it up with the guard and wing help defensively. And he can stretch the floor, and he can work in the post. I think that's a really good risk. He's going to opt in, so they're going to have to figure out what they're going to resign him. They didn't send really much in the way back, so that's a good. I thought those are good, like the exact right kind of risk for a team like Boston. And especially considering the Wizards are like in full fire sale off of their disaster regime that just signed everyone to the worst deals of all time. Like I know Wizards get killed here, but like that group that's selling these guys off wasn't the guys that signed them. So
but also, by the way, they're maybe picking up the 30th pick in the draft this year, and they just shed between Porzingis. I know he could have opted out, etc., but that was potentially over $70 million on the books that they just moved away from. Now you want to get more in the players and the value, but like that in and of itself is an important point. Like it's just to have the freedom of cap space and then start rebuilding. Whether we don't have to go down the Wizards rabbit hole here, as we'll turn our attention in a second to the prospects, some of the guys that I got to talk to here, and you maybe kind of just tea leaved your way into a potential player at the 21 and 22 range that we think could actually make a lot of sense for Brooklyn. We get into that here in a moment.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors for a championship team. It's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head on over to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Add your ride to My Garage. That's the eBay My Garage. Don't pull into My Garage. And look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Just like in sports confidence, the name of the game, the same as when you shop on eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a W when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items, exclusions apply.
All right, so we close out looking at the draft. Obviously, it's coming up. We'll talk a little bit about my experience at NBA Media Day. It was a lot of fun. People were great. All the prospects were great. I said it on Twitter. I think they all should be drafted number one. That's my policy. I don't know if they can make that work, but they should all at least be paid by number one picks, because everybody really was great. But let's talk about two players here. One that I had a chance to talk with today, actually, and the other one that you see the odds. And this has been a good way to look at it. Last couple episodes you've brought up. Go over to FanDuel, check where some of the betting odds are. It can give you a good indication about guys that could be available at 21 and 22 if ultimately the Brooklyn Nets stay there.
All right, yeah. So actually, let's talk about Olivier Maxson Prosper, because you talked about him, and I'll get to my guy here in a second. But you talked to Prosper at Media Day. He's a guy that we did do a draft episode about. Well, not a whole episode. We did a longer segment about where we looked at a significant amount of tape for him. He's being now mocked in some places to the Nets specifically. The odds, like you mentioned, at FanDuel have him plus 110 to go in the top 20, which, just in case you can read odds, that means he's not likely to go in the top 20, but right behind it, which again would put the Nets right at 21, 22. So that's where that number lands. But what were your feelings about talking to him, being in the same room, asking him some questions? That was before he started getting mocked, like specifically here to the Nets when you talked to him at Media Day.
I like to think in a lot of ways that it was me talking to him, a little bit of traction. They start to get the buzz. Adam's talking to Prosper. Could be something here. Yeah, we all see.
In my mind, it won't have gone any other way. So,
and if you got shunned by me at Media Day, I'm sure you're plummeting right now on a lot of boards. I love him. When we talked about him initially, I said everything about his baseline skill set looks like a very buildable and developable player that the Nets need and could use the value of. To talk to him in person, he looks every bit of the size, maybe even a little bit bigger than the 6'8", 6'9", depending on where you look. He gets listed at 230. Like, he has a strong frame. And I'm going to touch on one thing that means nothing to basketball. The dude was just absolute joy, to be there. He was excited. He was engaging. He was really thoughtful around the fact that he played, he's from Montreal. He looks at himself as being someone that now can start to help elevate basketball there, be someone that kids can look up to. He runs a camp there. And this is things that a lot of players do. But when you think about on the basketball court, he specifically mentioned, when I asked him, what are the areas of your game that you feel like people are sleeping on and don't realize you actually can be a real contributor at? And in his role in college, he wasn't asked to bring the ball up a court a lot. He wasn't asked to shoot a lot. But he said, going back to high school, when I was playing, that's a part of my game that I actually think can be a real asset at the NBA level. And he did that in workouts. That's why his stock has risen a little bit, because people were surprised relative to what you saw at Marquette. Ball handling's a little bit better. Court vision's a little bit stronger. Shooting touches there. Shot over 33% from beyond the arc. There's a lot of things that trend here. If I wanted to be balanced about it, as he took more free throw attempts, that number came down from 2 years ago to this past season, 73 from the line. But I loved him when we talked about him. I love him even more now. I'm just going to gush about him because I think that he's a guy, if you're sitting there at 21 and he's there, it'd be easy, no brainer. And I asked Rafael Barlow about him, and he gave all the confidence that you could take him as high as 21. And that was back when he was sitting on the edge of the first round 3-4 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's awesome to hear. I'm not surprised at all his pre-draft workouts went well. Just having watched a bunch of tape on him, you could see it. I mean, I was just going to read you my notes here real quick because I just think it's funny because I went back once you had talked to him to read the notes I wrote very high motor, 7'1" wingspan, took more threes. Then I wrote, looks like he's having convulsions, kind of in a good way on the defensive end.
I
Can
chose
really
not
switch.
to use those words when I highlighted it to him in person.
It was a compliment, and was able to hold up really good again.
Are you convulsing on defense? Please.
Was able to hold up really well against good lead guards in switching schemes. So I'm all for this. A guy that can, a big that can switch right away. I mean, literally day one into the Nets scheme is going to be a guy that I'm sure Sean Marks and company right? Like they, and Jacques Vaughn too, they want to play this scheme. All their other personnel is geared toward this, except for Day'Ron. And so I am not, we said this at the time and I back it up now. Like the offense will be an absolute work in progress, but the Nets are desperate for guys with high motors. No one on the team has a high motor. Now they are skilled, right? It's not a knock, but they don't have a fly all over the court, look a little crazy guy. I would be all on board with this pick. And if that's the personality to boot, I'm right there for it. So it was fun to go back and look at the notes again. It was fun that you got to catch up with them. We can get into this other guy, but I would co-sign this pick if this were the way if this was the way they decided to go. I'm getting choked up because I like it so much.
I chose to use intensity as my word to describe his defense. And I will say too, I went back like after interviewing him, then you have some time in the media room, start watching some highlights. And I was, a reminder on the offensive end, because it's funny, he has this intensity and this energy, which is great. Offensively, it's slow but fluid. Like he had an ability to go to the basket, use some up and under looks, and the little mid-range, like you think about a Nicholas Claxton, you think about guys switching defensively, and that's great. But then on the offensive end, there's no game to be found there. He's got a little mid-range floater, a little mid-range fadeaway. Like those are the things that I think if you talk about moving on from a Dorian Finney-Smith or moving on from a Royce O'Neal, you go, okay, there's a guy that can do things on both ends. One end of the floor is going to take longer, but you feel confident about those footsteps being available to you. So I really like him. Let's talk about your boy now, because we may have dialed it in here, Doug. We may have done our jobs.
Yeah, so I was looking through some odd stuff earlier today and actually into late last night on our podcast, and we was just looking at guys who hadn't been mocked a ton of places, but whose odds on FanDuel had crept into this top 20. And I thought it was interesting that one of these guys was Brandon Podziemski. And it was just, he was one of these guys from Santa Clara, sophomore from Santa Clara, was just not a guy that even like everyone else in the 19 through 25 range had been like, if you go somewhere, I looked through a million mock drafts, I think like 23 in total, maybe even more. And every guy that it was kind of just like it was a lot of guys, but it was all kind of the same guys that get mocked into these places. But this guy never went to the Nets. And I was like, well, it's funny because he's right around a plus 160 to go in the top 20, but Nets are 21 and 22 and no one ever says anything about him. The guy is an absolute flamethrower from deep. Like if you watch the tape, this guy was taking logo threes in college when he doesn't need to because the college line is closer, but he had some heat check stuff. It was like, honestly, at times after watching a bunch of it today, at times it was like he was shooting them specifically with the idea that the NBA guys were going to be watching it later, because there were sometimes he could have easily walked into a closer one and didn't. He shot the crazy lights. I shot 44% from three. And I'm telling you again, these were not all catch and shoot right at the line threes. And he just made all of them. He's 6'5". The athleticism isn't going to go crazy on you, but here's what you love to see. He's a 6'5" combo guard. He averaged 9 rebounds a game at Santa Clara. 9. Now, this is another issue that the Nets have had at times, and I know everyone was clamoring for like the rebounding thing. I get it. A 6'5" combo guard isn't going to just like solve your rebounding issues. But we know in the NBA, there are guys that just have a nose for this, right? Like they just are good at it, right? And sometimes it's size independent. Think about guards in the past who have been really good rebounders. James Harden's a great rebounder for a guard. Obviously Russell Westbrook. Now, some of these guys go stat hunting for it for sure, but there are dudes that just have this sort of in their bag as part of like what they want to do as part of their game. I do not think he'll be a 9 rebound guy. Like think Josh Hart. Like Josh Hart's like this. Yeah. Josh Hart's a smaller guy, smaller wing, and just absolutely wants to get after it on the boards. If you're a 6'5" combo guard, even at Santa Clara, that's averaging 9 boards a game, it's because you are absolutely going for it. And I think the Nets could really benefit from a guy like that. Again, athleticism won't go crazy on you. He's not really going to be taking a bunch of guys off the dribble. a lot of the in the lane stuff probably won't work at the NBA level. But right after kind of sending this out today and getting said about it, Sam Vecini from The Athletic mocked him and Olivia Maxence Prosper at 21 and 22 and said Podziemski specifically had been tied to the Nets. Like with OMP, he basically said this is best athlete available, right? With Brandon, he said this is a guy that's connected to the Nets. I really think as we get closer, like this could be the guy. So not married to it, not ready to bet on it, but this is as close as we've gotten as like firm name and not speculation, I think, yet.
Yeah, and I'm not against it because you need it. Everything that you listed there in terms of his skill set, you need. I'm always going to have that little bit of pause around athleticism, especially when then you attach 3-point shooting to it, and then you immediately think Joe Harris, and you just like because your mind, or at least my mind, goes to this place of like, okay, not that athletic, maybe can't do a lot of other things for you. When the shot's on, it's on. And when it's not, you're going to start to get a little bit frustrated with him. And that's not to put him into this singular category, right? There's upside, there's developmental ability that, and the rebounding piece matters. Like it matters if you just, as you said, have a nose for the ball at a position that doesn't need to be a primary rebounder, but can grab a couple of those weak side ones on the defensive glass when your other bigger bodies are battling some guys underneath. I wouldn't say I co-sign off on this being 21 and 22 and I'm elated about it. However, that a lot of that is predicated on the idea that Brendan was not a player that was really getting talked about in this range, where I didn't look at him nearly as deeply as I have with other guys that felt like they were a realistic option. So it'll be interesting to see over the next 24 hours if this becomes even more set in stone. And then we'll really start to get a sense of maybe what the moves the Nets want to make around these picks in terms of adjusting the roster. Because now you want to make space for these guys to have real roles coming in the door.
And just like as a note about this, like where he's mocked into other places, like Kevin O'Connor over the Ringer has him at 25, right? Like, so he's not living sort of, what's that?
Not too far off, like, 20 to 25, 26-ish range. Like that's,
like exactly. Like he's sort of living in these ranges. So it wouldn't be this crazy over grab, I don't think, by any stretch of the imagination. But it's just, like I said, it's worth bringing up because it's not a guy that we had dove too much into over the last couple of days. But in thinking about it and like sort of like he would represent to me like a one for now, one for later. We talked about this with some other guys, Chris Murray was sort of like this, but that I'm not sure that name's going to stay sticky in terms of where the Nets are. But it was like, could he come in and play right now? Yeah, probably. Right? Is he going to ever be great? No, probably not. But if you have two picks, it makes sense to maybe grab a guy that you feel like you could play day one, and a guy that maybe is going to play day 365 or something like that, right? Or day 180. And so, these two guys, at least from a sort of archetype standpoint, do sort of fit that, I think, for the Nets. But not to say this is gonna be the way they would go, but it makes sense that these two kind of guys will be mocked to them. In
that mode, it makes sense if you think back to what was the back end of the season, what were the players around Mikal Bridges, and what did they lack? Right, consistency from the outside, consistent 3-point shooting that provided spacing. Because if Mikal Bridges is your number one, and we can be excited about the next level of his game, you need to create pockets for him because he can live in the mid-range, just like some of the best shooters in the game, but not if you don't have consistent threats. Dorian Finney-Smith struggled in this area. Royce O'Neal, hot and cold coming in off the bench. Joe Harris, absolute dumpster fire by the end of it all, right? Like, so you do need to add that in there to make sure that you're giving Mikal Bridges the right supporting cast to elevate his game as high as possible. Hardest shot I've ever taken at Joe Harris. What a time.
Yeah, buddy. Man, it's just rough times to be around these streets. This has been a pretty pro Joe. It's hard. It was hard to defend this season. Okay, look, we're going to get out of here on the regular pod. If you're listening on the podcast, you have to be subscribed to YouTube because we're about to go live on YouTube for a while here. I think we got a bunch of people in listening, people throwing in questions already. Hang around here for a little bit. Throw a question in at Locked On Nets if you have some stuff to ask. As a reminder, for those of you that are listening on the podcast feed or just catching up with YouTube later, make sure you are around for draft night. We are going to be live for quite possibly a long time. Adam will be at the draft. I'll be here live doing as much stuff as I can, just leading into the draft, who's coming off the board. Some of it's going to be sort of like on the fly. might get a little funky because I'm going to be watching the draft live with everybody else and just trying to react to it. But we're going to put it up on YouTube and just have some fun with it too. So make sure you are subscribed to Locked On Nets over on YouTube to grab all that. And here, hang around for a couple minutes because we're going to do Locked On Nets live on YouTube going here in a sec.
You know, I had a heck of an experience today, and it's going to continue tomorrow. And it brought to mind, I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them. Andy from The Office.
Andrew Bernard, one of the all-time great poets. We will be back again tomorrow and in a second on YouTube with more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
And to quote Michael Scott, now we'll show you how we make my sausage, right?
Let me show you how the turntables have turned.
Throw in your comments, your questions, as Doug said. Anything about, like, the media day piece, it was a lot of fun. I didn't want to dilute from, there's a lot, it turns out there's a lot to talk about around the draft. And there'll be more stuff. Like, as we get into these questions, as Doug mentioned, like tomorrow, I'm going to try to be jumping in live with Doug from Barclays Center. There's going to be a lot of fun stuff going on. So I appreciate everybody here and people on Twitter who were messaging to confirm if this was going to be a normal episode tonight. Do I get to listen to it on my morning drive tomorrow because it's part of my routine? Like, I really love the support that we've been getting, like, around this draft and prospects and everything. So it's been amazing.
Real quick, before we get into some of these questions, just go through a couple of the guys that you talked to. I know you talked to Olivier Maxence Prosper, but I know you talked to a bunch of other guys today. Just go through some of the folks that are here on YouTube about who some of these guys. I'll queue up some questions here, but go through a couple. You don't have to go through everything you talked about, but just detail a few of the dudes you talked to.
I'm going to reference my player headshot sheet, which they gave out there when you show up for media day, just to make sure I don't miss any. I talked to Taylor Hendricks. Liked him. Like, he's a young kid, pretty exuberant, very direct with his responses. He's out of the Nets range at this moment, so it's a little bit disheartening. He was a lot of fun to talk to. Coulibaly, asked him. He was a little disappointed to have to carry Wembanyama for all that time and really elevate his profile, like his game. Anthony Black as well prided himself on consistently developing an entire game, and that's what he feels like has kept him in the top 10 of prospects. You have a lot of guys rising and falling. He hasn't moved for the most part because every team can look and see a player like that being on their roster. Other notable ones here. I did talk to, by the way, we'll get to Kason Wallace, because I did talk to him as well, as someone asked a question about him. Talk to Prosper. Ryan Rupert, good guy, good player, calm demeanor. Most of the French-born players, very neutral when you're talking to them at the interaction there and doing the interview process. And then, by the way, Kobe Buffkin, last two guys I'll mention. Kobe Buffkin does not lack for confidence. He is a smaller in stature player in person. Jet Howard looked enormous to me. And if there's a guy that I wasn't like super high on when we talked about him, but standing there and interviewing him, he like checks all the boxes and understanding where his game is, where he needs to take it to, how confident he is in improving the areas, like defensively, being able to switch. Like, he knows he has to work on staying in front of guys and being a step quicker. That was an interesting one to talk to as well. And I did talk to, who was the last guy? Let's see if I bring him up here. I watched Brendan Miller have his conversations. Didn't seem worth it. I did talk to Grady Dick, by the way. I talked to him because I was very curious how he felt about being treated as a pure shooter in the NBA and nothing else. And he laughed it off and took it all in stride and just said, yeah, when you're really good at one area, people will overlook the other aspects of your game that actually can be pretty useful. Every single one of these guys, man, were fantastic to speak with. They were all very open. Keontae George. Sorry, this is a bit of a ramble here. I talked with him, and we had just gone through this. He seemed to have, in the same way about like Jet Howard, a very clear understanding that what he was doing at college might not translate the same way at the NBA level. So it's funny. A lot of these guys reference this idea of what was winning basketball at the college level or what was the best thing at the college level. I understand spacing is going to give me more opportunities. Ryan Rupert spoke to that. Grady Dick spoke to that. Things are going to be different, and the opportunities to showcase more are going to be different. No player is going to sit here and tell you, I'm bad at this, and that's unfortunate. But there were guys that really seemed to check the box in understanding what's next for them. And Keontae George, someone that I, spoke concerning about being mocked to the Nets, that conversation at least moved it a little bit. Plus, he was wearing a beautiful salmon suit. All right, let's get into some questions.
Yeah, so let me call up a couple things. I want to mention one guy that we haven't talked about too that have been moved up boards. Maybe I'll wait till tomorrow. I was going to talk about a little about Jaime Jaquez, but he's actually moved, maybe even moved past where the Nets can draft him. This is another guy that's just vaulted up boards. He's actually being projected to the Heat. Maybe I'll wait on this. Get up. Bring up some questions here. All right, let's scroll through some of these.
Yeah.
Ooh, we got a new look here on StreamYard. I forgot. Okay. Pacers are rumored to be willing to trade the number 7 pick. Any chance Marks calls them? Here's my opinion real quick on this one. I don't think the Nets have the juice to get to 7. It's so hard. Like, I know that we have 2 picks and like a wing. The wings, I don't think would be enticing to what the Pacers are trying to do on their timeline. So I think they kind of miss out there. And 21 and 27 is not enough draft capital to get up to 7. So that's go ahead. You can expound on that.
The Pacers have multiple first-round picks, so it's not even enticing in that regard, too. I don't think it's enough juice to your point. Even if you said, we'll give you Royce O'Neal and Dorian Finney-Smith, it all doesn't sync up there. There's some teams that I can dream on. Again, the Dallas Mavericks continue to be one of those teams that you can entice them with a player and a pick, or maybe both picks if that's what it takes. But 7 is just like that it's that step a little bit too far to think the Nets are going to get there.
All right, let me hit it a couple more here. Keep throwing them in there. Hit app Locked On Nets. I'm trying to roll through as many questions as I can. Okay, Nets are apparently looking to move up. I think that's still on the board here. They need another ball handler. I agree with this. And they think they need to double down on their defensive identity. I would love if the target is Kayson Wallace. He's another guy. Well, go ahead. Give your opinion on this one, and then I have a thought about Kayson. But what's your opinion on Kayson?
Well, I'll just say I did speak with him today at Media Day, taking a pride in being a two-way player. He wants to have that on his calling card to be able to take on the more difficult assignment when it comes to the defensive end, freeing up someone else like Mikal Bridges to not have to do that heavy lift there. There's a lot that I like about his game. He's disgusted by the idea of commercial airlines. That's something we can get into a little bit later if we have time. He was a very, very good personality, very good kid, very just a pleasant conversation. Game-wise, where do you stand on him? Because he was interesting to think about him after I spoke with him. Go look at some of the boards and say, where is the value relative, by the way, to other backcourt players, right? Because you're always going to compare him to what your other options are at a position like that.
Yeah, so I think like defensively, he would fit their identity pretty well. He's probably in the range where they could maybe start thinking about packaging too to get up to this spot. Like if he's in the 14 to 16 range, I'm just not sure like the offense is good enough. And so this one's close for me. I'm not sure I'm in love with it to the point of like wanting to move off the 2 picks, but I know there are people in Nets world that are. So I think like attitude wise, game wise, I always like when guys like lead ball handlers can play defense, and Nets have like struggled at times with some point of attack defense. I think he probably starts to begin to solve some of that. Yeah, this one's close. I could see it. And I think if it ended up happening, we'd feel pretty good about it. Right. I personally start getting married to the two bites of the apple in this range is a bit better than one, just because I think the Nets, that's where they are. You know what I mean? And like, you have to be so confident at this point to move up just that many spots. Cause I think they're going to be in a spot where they're just going to need 2 cheap guys. Like they are just going to need them. And I don't know. It's close. If they did it though, we wouldn't be upset about it. Right.
No. And I think the curiosity to me would be like, is it 15? Is it 16? Is it 17? You know, where is he as the board is unfolding? Can you get away with a player and a pick to get there? Can you, if you use 21 and 22 to get to that spot, a team wants both those picks. Have you been able to flip Royce O'Neal and turn him into a mid-20s pick, right? So there's a lot of scenarios where giving up what you have right now to go get him is fine, and I can be excited about it, to your point, as long as you turn around and find a way to get back in here, because it just seems like there's a lot of healthy options in those 20s that you would be disappointed if you missed out on. If a Prosper goes off the board at like 23, 24, and you're like, we were one trade away, right? Sean Marks was a little too stiff on what he wanted back in return to not give Royce O'Neal to the Memphis Grizzlies and get 25 to get Prosper. That would be frustrating to hear on the back end, I think.
Yes, I think this is actually just the draft to like do that. To like, if it was Royce to get off the money and take someone at 25, there's guys in that range that you can talk yourself into for sure. That are just younger, cheaper, will possibly have some upside. I'd be all for that. And this is a guy who has liked Royce O'Neal a lot, right, over the years. So it's got nothing to do with O'Neal specifically. Clash, long time fan. One of the OGs here. What's the next team that Sean Marks fleeces? I don't know if Sean Marks has the fleece. The double Harden trade is when you have that on your resume.
Not that one, Doug. Think of the other trades.
What team do you envision are hungry for wings? We mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, there are definitely teams that are not desperate, but would probably like to have the services of Royce O'Neal and or Dorian Finney-Smith. I'll just go through some of them again. Dallas at 10. I don't think either of these guys are good enough to get the 10 pick, but Dallas definitely could use Dorian Finney-Smith back in a big way, right? Yeah. So what they're willing to unload to get him back, I'm not really sure. I don't think it's the 10th pick, but Dallas is clearly a team that would want to do it. Lakers have been rumored in this range to want to try to add some defensive sort of 4 maybe small ball 5 help. These guys would probably fit the bill, probably more Dorian Finney-Smith than Royce, but I can see them doing it. We talked a long time about the Cavs. Like the Cavaliers were desperate for a guy who could guard the 3 last year. It's not exactly what they need because they could really love for that guy to be able to score, and these guys really can't. But
Royce and Mitchell, that's a nice, that's familiarity from the Jazz.
But yes, there's familiarity there, and O'Neal can probably do just enough ball handling that I could see him, them moving off him. But that's a little out of the range. I mean, those are the teams. Anyone more come to the top of your head? There probably are a couple more, but
yeah, I was scrolling. I'm scrolling through, the draft order there and just thinking
Memphis.
Maybe. Yeah, Memphis. That's 25, right? So you're moving a little bit further down at that point. Yeah, going behind where the Nets currently pick. Then I think, even a team like Golden State, Royce O'Neal, not Dorian Finney-Smith, but Royce O'Neal could make sense for a team like that. What are they looking to do with themselves? The other thing that we mentioned earlier in the show about Atlanta and trying to move up, same thing when I talked about, when there was a Damian Lillard possibility to say, do you package these trades up to get higher to have a more valuable asset? I wonder if when you hear about teams wanting to move up like that, can the Brooklyn Nets go there and say, you're at 15 right now, you want to get to Destination X? Can you take a Dorian Finney-Smith and move with and get to where you want to go, and we slide up into 15? So sometimes it's not even about who are wing needy teams, but who are teams that are looking to get something done on draft night, moving around the board, and you can just help pass pieces through to get where you ultimately want to be. That's one of the other ways that I would think about it. For the most part, a lot of it feels like it could be back and behind the Nets. And I wonder if Sean Marks is hesitant to do that, feeling like there was 2 first-round pick value on Dorian Finney-Smith. There's first-round value on Royce O'Neal. Again, this feels like the draft class to do it in, though. What did we
okay, let's move on to a couple more here. Keontae George wanted to be a net. I'm not surprised that he would say this. Like, he's seen his stock kind of started to fall here a little bit as the draft. I mean, this is a guy that when we first talked about him, he was in that, we thought he might even be in that 11, 12 range. And we talked about it. We're like, they'd have to move up. I don't think he would fall all the way to the Nets at this point. He's probably more in that 16 to 20 range is my guess. But, I could be that. When you start slipping, you can keep slipping. You know what I mean? So that's a little hard to get a handle on in terms of, sort of where ultimately it's going to land. Some places have mocked Keontae George to the Nets. I didn't think at the time this was a perfect fit for Brooklyn. I thought it was I wrote down he was a mix between Spencer Dinwiddie and Cam Thomas. That's kind of what I wrote as one of my notes at the time. It was can run on ball stuff, can score. You get a little bit worried about if the skills are ever going to fully round out to be a really, really impactful player. The assist numbers, I always get super concerned with these combo guards when the assist numbers in college are really low.
Yeah.
Right. And we've just seen this story before with some other guys. And when it's just not in your repertoire to ever pass, right? And even at the college level, I get a little concerned. If you're not doing something else, and he really just wasn't, definitely. And it's not he'll probably end up being able to shoot. The shooting was just meh at Baylor, but I don't know. This one, if he fell to 22, 21, 22, fine. Moving up to get him, definitely not. That's my feeling on it.
Oh, that's a good way to frame it. Yeah, I wouldn't move up for him. I would understand if they took him at 22. I would still be surprised if there weren't other guys on the board at that time that I said, wow, I'm surprised they didn't go with one of these guys instead. I'll quickly say, asked here, does it feel like there's positive about Ryan Rupert coming to Brooklyn? Did you feel any vibes? One thing, when we talked about, where his game was and saying the offense is going to need time, right? And you said 2 years away from the shot really developing. When I asked him about like where his game was, like he acknowledged it. I can come in, I can be a defensive contributor immediately. I can defend a lot of different positions. I can be a high energy guy for you there. It's going to take time for the other end to develop. He believes that there's a lot of translatable skills there, models himself after Mikal Bridges. That's all great. But I got this sense that Ryan Rupert understands where his game is right now and what it's going to mean when he first gets into the NBA. And from that regard, at 21 and 22, again, if it's the one for now, one for later, I don't have a problem with Ryan Rupert. But we're starting to shape ourselves into a little bit different perspectives here. Going back to, if I want to get Prosper and Podziemski, like I'll check those two boxes for one for now, one for later, maybe before I would check Rupert.
You're probably reaching at 21, 22 at this point with him.
Yeah.
We kind of thought that again at the time we talked about it. It's so raw. It's so raw. Like it now look, 4 years from now, if you went at 30 and we're like, oh my God, he went at 30. Like I could see us having that conversation, but reaching here is a bit tough, I think. But I do like when the guys say all the right things because you can definitely, it's so funny. You don't get necessarily points for saying the right things, but it's easy to say the wrong things. And so just acknowledging your strengths and acknowledging sort of the things, areas of improvement. I mean, we have a guy on the team now who has never acknowledged an area of improvement in Ben Simmons. Like no areas to improve, right?
You gotta find something he does wrong first.
Because it's funny because the only reason I hate to just all of a sudden have Simmons take a stray here, but you do notice it when the guys don't acknowledge it, right? And so like that and that
Thomas
it's glaring.
falls in this category too, right? When asked after games and he says, "Yeah, I don't know what I can do,"
Who's it? Who is this?
Cam Thomas, when saying like, "Hey, how do you find your way to more playing time?" He goes, "Yeah, I don't know. That's on the coaching staff to tell me."
Right.
And you hear Jacques Vaughn giving you one-to-one answers of like, it's more than just scoring. It's about defense and whatever. And that's a young player developing, far different than a guy in Ben Simmons' shoes where you go, hey, there's things that you need to be better at if you want to be a $40 million player.
Yeah, so right. Being at a young age, and Rupert is really young, and acknowledging the areas of your game, it just means you've identified them and you know that they need to be worked on. So probably a reach. Yeah. But
as you pull up the next question, I'll just say really quick. One thing that was being asked a lot too, because now you have the G League Ignite, you have now French-born players in leagues playing over in Europe, you have players coming from Canada. This comparison about the styles of games and what's being held against, players from different areas, different leagues, and different structures, that's become really interesting to hear at the media day, where it's like, yeah, what gets asked of you here, in Europe versus in the US versus in college versus in Canada. It really does create an interesting cross-section for NBA teams to try to evaluate a sample size based on different constraints, right? And that's what I think is fascinating, especially about younger players, when you think about giving them a year or two to develop, maybe just knowing they haven't had that runway to get to that spot.
Yeah, and this has been the exact problem with evaluating the overtime elite guys. You just don't know what you're watching sometimes. Sometimes it's very difficult to know, which is awesome. These guys have a million different opportunities now. You don't have to just go through the college grinder where these guys were just, chopped up and spit out for years and years. You have other options. So it's cool, but some of them are new. Some of them are hard to evaluate, and sometimes the competition can be tough. All right, let me throw some more up here. Yeah. This is a quick one. What point can new draftees be traded? They can be traded right away. These guys, there's no timetable. Example being last year, Rudy Gobert, the Rudy Gobert trade, Walker Kessler was in that trade. He had just been drafted and he was in the trade, not 10 minutes later, but not too long after. Draft picks can be traded basically starting the second they're drafted. So no worries there.
They basically stay open and fluid the entire time for that exact reason.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So like I said, Walker Kessler is a really good example, and turns out he's better than Rudy Gobert anyway. So they traded all the picks and they got the worst guy. No, I'm just kidding. But he might end up being better than him. All right. Let me this is interesting. What does Cameron Johnson have any trade value to move up? No, because he's an unrestricted free agent and they don't have his rights. So they can't. he can't be traded right. Well,
He's
yeah, no, he
restricted
can't
free
be.
agent, right?
He's a restricted free agent, but the window for other teams to open to make offers extends beyond
Oh
the
yeah,
draft.
yeah.
So he
Sign and
could be.
trade would be a way to go.
So I have taken it back. If he signed right now,
Yeah.
Actually, no. Even if he signed right now, it'd have to be a sign trade. So I don't think he even has the thing. Anyway, point is, he's a restricted free agent, and there's no way he would do this because he's going to go out there, and there could be a bidding war on him. So there would be no reason for him to facilitate anything to move up. And I don't believe you could trade him even if they did it because there would be a moratorium on that anyway. So
Did you find Kuzma saying he's seeking 30 million to be a sweet and juicy little plot point?
He and I both, buddy. Both.
We've been pushing for that. We've been pushing.
I would enjoy $30 million a year too. Yeah. I mean, it's funny about Kuzma, man, because it's I mean, who's going to pay that? Like, I just don't even know what team with tons of cap room. I mean, unless it's just the Wizards because they have to spend the money. Like, Porzingis is out the door, Beal's out the door. At some point,
think about this.
You got to spend.
What was it? 15 million was his opt out or opt in number. I think that he was coming off of there with the Wizards. So he opted out of that to go to market. Now, again, if you want 30 million, I can do the quick math. That's double. So I understand why you're going to market, but like, there's the world, man. You go back to the Wizards that aren't going to have anybody. You could put on a clinic in an opt-in year and then, really elevate whatever your value is if you truly believe in it. It seems it's aggressive. I'm going to put it that way to say, like, I'm going to market and I want 30 million with all of the constraints we know that are coming in with the new CBA and everything. It just seems like Kuzma is like, the old not reading the room so well. It doesn't look like he's doing that at this moment. And maybe I'll be proven wrong, right? Like maybe someone will.
He might just benefit from like them having just traded Beal and Porzingis and you have to meet the salary cap floor. Right. And like, so at some point you just have to spend the money and they have nothing on the books and it's not like they're going to sign a lot of their guys. So sometimes you can benefit in that direction because they were projected for 149. This is the Wizards 149 million next year. And they just lopped off 82 million. Right. And so in just Beal and Porzingis, assuming the Porzingis deal goes through, which they have till midnight on that, by the way. If it doesn't get completed by midnight, that's his opt-in timeline, and then he would become a unrestricted free agent. So my guess is they get it done. But anyway, my point being, at some point you got to pay somebody, and like my guess is that's just what happens.
Not Nets related, just 25 million for Cameron Johnson, 30 million for Kuzma. Like, where would you spend the money? Just general GM, not the Brooklyn Nets. Just where would you drop that? Is that, you know what I mean? I'd
rather have Kuzma, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting,
Actually, I don't know. That one's, I'll say Kuzma. But like, it's a little hard for me to tell if Kuzma just like good stats, bad team guy. Like, so, whereas Cameron Johnson's kind of like, of it, yeah. Well, Cameron Johnson's kind of like not that many stats. Decent team guys. So like I just don't it's probably close. I mean, they're probably closer than you think. Like Kuzma, you trust a little bit more on ball. Cam's better on defense. It's closer. I'll just take the savings and hope that Cameron Johnson's 3-point shooting comes like all the way back. I'll go Cameron Johnson and hope that he's actually a 40% 3-point shooter.
Sorry, I thought you were saying that maybe I'll just take the savings and like neither. I'll just take neither. I'll just keep all the money. It's fine. I'll keep all the money. Last one. Clash came back in here with what would it take to get Tyus Jones? That's again an interesting conversation. We've talked about how I don't know if he's the answer or the guy that I would say the Nets should have, expiring 14 million. I talked with Locked On Grizzlies at the time. It seemed like, you get a Royce O'Neal and you give him a Patty Mills because they don't have a backcourt really, and you're going to have the suspension for John Morant. Like, it didn't seem like the Grizzlies needed to be pushed hard to move off of Tyus Jones, which immediately made me think, why do I want to trade for Tyus Jones? Because his numbers when he started, when Morant was out, were great. So everything, it's like projected forward, scrappy defender, all the stats go good, but make him your starting point guard. And they're like, yeah, you should make him your starting point guard. That's a concern to me. So I don't know how much I would spend to get him.
Let me throw up a couple more questions. We'll probably do a couple more minutes here and get out of here. They trade up for Lively. They trade up and go for Lively, Stan Pat, and draft Najee. Lively's one of these guys where I would say one of these guys where it's hard to find consensus on where he should go. Some boards have him really high, like in near the top 10. Some have him like closer to the 20 range. It's hard to deny the size. I mean, he's absolutely massive. I always just, like I said, get a little worried about these like center only dudes, just because when you're only one thing, those guys just have to be your best player. So, and just bear with me for a second. Like,
Okay.
if you are going to, I mean, I guess if you draft in the middle, like the teens, it probably doesn't matter. But those guys, I'll say point guards and centers, like they have to be your best player. If you're going to pay them a lot, let's say, or they're going to be your best player, like it just makes it really, really tough. Now, the situation in the NBA is if those guys are your best player because they're so transcendent, then your team actually can win the championship, a la Jokic, a la Giannis, Steph, right? Like these dudes that are just ones or basically fives, right? If they're transcendent, it actually is pretty easy to fill in the pieces around them. Because there's so many wing guys. And I'm parroting a little bit of something I heard kind of espoused the other day, but I totally agree with it. My concern with a guy like Lively is that just using like this kind of draft capital on, even though he's huge and could be amazing, I guess maybe it's probably worth it. But like, I don't know. It's close. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And it wasn't, and it's not like, I know the measurables are amazing. It's not like the stuff he did at Duke completely popped off the page, right? He didn't score at all. He barely rebounded. He's 7-1. He had 5 rebounds a game. Now I know there's context.
9-4 reach.
That's what I mean. Like, you know how hard it is to play 21 minutes a game and be, basically like 8 feet tall with a wingspan and only grab 5 rebounds. It's not easy. So I don't know. I get a little worried here. I can see why there's skepticism here. And
here's one of the things, because he started near 20, pushed up to 10. Maybe he's settling into the teens, which maybe makes sense. This is something that I hate. I hate when this gets said, that I don't like the player at 10, but I could really like him at 20. Like, if you don't, the skills that you don't like, then you shouldn't be able to convince yourself that you want it later. One of the other things I've heard too was the idea of, the Nets target Lively in a trade up, etc., in preparation of replacing Nicholas Claxton if they don't re-sign him. I'll tell you right now, then I understand there's money involved, but I don't think replacing the guy that is he's more versatile than Lively would be defensively, just as a prospect overall. And he still has all of the concerns around other areas of his game. Like, I don't think you start to project that if you're the Brooklyn Nets of, let's rewind the clock 3 years and have a more developmental player that we don't even know if he can reach the level that Nicholas Claxton has at this point. Money being considered, I wouldn't see that as being like the Sean Marks Brooklyn Nets logic of, let's prepare for an exit of a guy that's still only going to be 24, 25 years old when it comes time to re-up him.
And I'll say this, the case for Lively is that you just can't train someone to have a 7'7" wingspan.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's not something you can go into the gym and correct. Right. So sometimes you have measurables that are tantalizing enough, and he's got a great motor and stuff like that. And like by all accounts, like it wouldn't be a personality fit by any stretch of the imagination. It's like just as you have the overall basketball skills. Like, I think that's the question, is like, are the basketball skills are going to be well-rounded enough for him?
And I said that I made that point about, like, you shouldn't say this at 10, but then at 20. But again, once upon a time when we first started this, I said, at 21, 22, Derek Lively, that's a great looking prospect for the Brooklyn Nets. And then as he moved up towards 10, I was like, well, you can't trade up to go target him. Like, so I fell into that trap, which I think exposed the areas of his game that would be concerning.
And by the way, like, if we're trying to think about guys in this range who 4 years from now, we're like, how did he go 15?
Yeah.
This guy would fit into that class, right? Whereas, like, conversely, I probably wouldn't say that about Keontae George, right? I'm just going to use a guy we've already mentioned. Like, if he went 20, I don't think later we're going to be having this I could be wrong, but I don't think we'll be having this conversation of be like, man, how did he, you know what I mean? It'll be like, oh, it's probably just a good pick.
Yeah.
But there are certain guys where you could say to yourself, holy cow, what did everyone miss? I'm not calling him Giannis, but like, you know what I mean? Like, there's certain guys that you could say when we do the
a little more
moratorium
math and a little more tweak of an area of the game, you go, oh yeah, he actually is close to what you need him, close to reaching that level. And it was just about growth trajectory where certain guys, you mentioned Keontae George, not to pick on him, but it's, look, 4 years from now, what could you substantially have improved that would even move you, even if you did improve those things, that would change the idea of your value is probably somewhere around the 20s, right? Like that's just,
and I know
where
we're
the
just like
value
picking
lies.
yeah, right. I'm
And,
just
and,
picking a
and,
random
and,
name here.
Ryan Rupert too. Let's talk about a guy that has a lot to work on, right? Could I look back in 4 years and say, well, if his offensive game comes around, yeah, I could reflect on him being that guy. Jett Howard would be the example of maybe of a guy where you go, we had this such close to a baseline. I don't know if 4 years from now, what you may end up saying is, wow, he's valuable because he's a good, consistent NBA player. You'll never draft those guys top 10, but you always need those guys, and that's why they're there, 15 to 20 kind of range. For the people that are in here right now, he was having a great conversation with Mark Spears, was interviewing Jett Howard when I was there at Media Day, and he was talking about growing up around LeBron James, the Miami Heat in that era of when they were winning championships, and he was talking about how Juwan Howard, his father, great trash talker, and Mark Spears asked him if he has trash talk in his game, but I pivoted to the better one and asked, would you trash talk LeBron James? And he had a chuckle. It was a good personality. Had a chuckle about it. No. Be respectful. Just head down. Try to do my job. Now, if he talks trash to me, though, I would talk trash back. So it was just a great, like, this dude has clearly come up NBA lineage and was like, he had every bit of like, no, of course not, dude. I was a kid walking around this guy's locker room asking what kind of powder he uses. But if he comes at me, I will push back a little bit. He's getting up in years. So,
and he's a guy that's actually, with Jett, like that, he's a guy that, we had originally talked about maybe in that Nets range, and he's actually probably beyond it now, which is really interesting to see how that goes. Right. It's like, he was kind of living in that range. It seemed like, we were trying to figure out if that's something we would want or not. Right. And like we talked about all the, we talked at the time actually about, one of the superlatives we thought for Jett Howard was NBA family. That's another thing you can't teach.
Yep.
Like just grew up in the game on a professional level, even though he was not himself a professional. He grew up in a professional all the way through basketball for life family.
Yep.
And that is not something you can teach either. And that was actually, and we use that as a superlative for his games. Like to say, oh, that actually might be one way to like look past of some things that weren't amazing about him. And I'm looking back at my notes for him, and I was probably thought that was going to be a pretty good pick for them. Right. So, but now it looks like it looks like that's a pipe dream, because it looks like he's going to go much higher, and it's not surprising to hear him kind of like answer the right things. Right.
Yeah.
And
say it the right way. Right. I kind of know how I should be handling all of these things.
And if you missed Adam at the top of the podcast, he said Jett Howard's absolutely enormous in person.
My God. And by the way, I saw his father walking through the hotel. Guess what? Also enormous. Juwan Howard.
He's like 7 feet tall. Like, right? Like Juwan's massive,
he got on the
right?
escalator going downstairs. He was still on the second floor when he got to the bottom. No, but seriously, Ben Simmons, will he be more valuable next year? No reason to try to move him now. I don't think that they are going to move him now. I mean,
well, it'd be hard to be less valuable.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if he'll be more valuable, but he can't get less valuable. And that's, I think, really where the Nets are. Can't get worse. Can it?
Yeah, so he's still getting thrown into fake trades, which I'll never understand. Okay, I think we are going to call it here. Look, we're going to be doing this.
Let's do the last one that we had start up here, just so we make sure we hit it.
Sorry.
I just want to say that I want to wrap this into this, not the 7 stuff. Just what do you think ultimately happens with those guys? Do the Nets trade both, keep both, trade one when it comes to Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neal?
Okay, I think they trade one of them and keep one. I think they stick at 21 and 22, and I think that's the totality of it. But
I don't mind that.
I don't feel crazy great about that, because we've seen this Mark's shenanigans at times like this. Like, think about the Landry Shamet year, the year they had the first pick, but the team was in a different space then. So I think they're in development mode. I think they want to get younger. I think they're motivated to get these guys off the books. I think at least one of them gets traded. I think they stick at 21 and 22 and draft some version of safe now, upside later guys. That's my prediction.
I'll close out with, I think Royce O'Neal is the better player to keep in the short term. I think we talk about Memphis. If you can trade Royce O'Neal for the 25th pick and you keep Dorian Finney-Smith because you still have the contract and you can always move him later, 21 picking 3 players, like picking 3 players for the Brooklyn Nets is not like the weirdest idea if you don't have picks next year. if you're thinking about, especially if you take 2 for later and you say, yeah, next year, these are the guys we're developing. Like there's a world where if they have to keep one of those veterans and you can't clear the space out, I'm not going to fault them for taking Prosper, taking Podsmensky, taking Whitehead. Like I can name 3 guys from 20 to 30 that I'd be happy if they were on the Brooklyn Nets. So if you want to get squirrely in your Sean Marks, why don't you get squirrely in a way where you have even more young talent, knowing that you're going to want to move away from Joe Harris, Patty Mills. There's 5-6 guys on this roster that the Nets want to get off of here at some point.
Yeah, look, Seth is out the door too. They're
Yeah.
just going to be younger next year, almost no matter what happens. I think they have a path to kind of lock that in and take a few bites of the apple, which around this area
getting thrown out there too. Like another name.
Oh man, he's really fallen. I'll say this will be the last thing about GJ. Like I think one thing I was listening to, oh man, I've listened to so much stuff now. I just can't even remember who it was. But let me just see where he landed here. I guess like his interviews. God, who was it? I'm trying to find it real quick. Hold on, give me 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Because his interviews went so bad that I'm not sure how much he dropped here. Right? Like, yeah, geez, I can't even find him mocked up. I guess Gigi's stuff just has maybe gone off the rails. Like he got into the room with some of these teams. Maybe it was Gavoni.
Right now, ESPN, just by one metric, 33rd now on the board.
Yeah. Maybe it was Gavoni that said it. It was either him. I've listened. This is all I've done like the last 48 hours, just listen to draft stuff. But so it's getting a little confused. Supposedly his in the room stuff was like worse than you could imagine. I don't know if it was just the wrong answers, if it was just the attitude, if it was just the things that we sort of worried about when we talked about him as a prospect, which was the stats stuff is all there, but man, there's some like major red flags, and not like criminal red flags, but just like motor. We talk again, you know, want to talk about like red flags? We talked about this before. We said at the time, I was like, what's my biggest concern among all this stuff? The guy didn't pass the ball like one time at South Carolina. He had 0.8 assists in 32 minutes. That's impossible. The ball will just by
accidentally roll off your hands.
That's what I mean. Like you play 32 minutes a game and have the ball that much. Like sometimes the ball will roll out of your hands. But when he's like, nah, time for Gigi to cook, like you'll never have this. So I'm not in the area where I'm like just not surprised where this has gone for him. Yeah. We said at the time, we're like, look, the measurable stuff is there, but there's just such huge concerns about the other stuff, and it looks like it's really kind of playing out that way. One person asked, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. What was
it's just a shame because again, like to meet all these guys and stuff, like I came out of it being like, man, I'm excited for every one of them. They're all going to go someplace. They're all going to start their careers. And then there are these instances of guys that are struggling through the draft process and interviews. And Gigi Jackson's having a very different experience right now, right? Like he's having a very difficult experience. And hopefully maybe if he ends up falling somewhere, it's the jump off point to recalibrate what he needs to do to be successful. Because all the measurables tell you he can be, but not everybody's going to be the perfect prospect.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Like I said, tomorrow, check back in. We are going to be doing draft stuff. I'm not sure what time we'll start. Maybe like 8, maybe 7:30, 8 o'clock around the time of the draft. We'll lock that in tomorrow. Make sure you're following at Adam Armbrecht on Twitter. He's going to be at Barclays all day tomorrow, leading into the draft. During the draft, he'll be going live from there a bunch. We'll be checking in with him the whole time. I'll be here on YouTube trying to hold it down the fort with some of the network stuff and just get, when the Jets, holy cow, the Nets draft. There we go. I got it. The Nets draft will be right there with it, with reactions and all the other pieces. So really, really exciting time. And by the way, if something nuts happens tomorrow, we'll come live right away and just make sure we hammer that also. So a lot of stuff going on. Someone asked about, what about Seth Curry? Seth Curry's not going to be back with the Nets. So there you go. That answers that one. And that is going to be it for us. Really, really appreciate everyone that came and stuck around in YouTube. If you haven't, make sure you hit subscribe to Locked On Nets YouTube. We'll know when we're going live tomorrow, and we'll be back tomorrow covering the draft.
And all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.